Afternoon, everyone. I'm Margaret Boozer, and this is Clay from the Ground, Collaborations with the Land. We're going to introduce the panelists here. First, we'd like to say thank you to the New York State Museum and Dr. Jennifer Lemack for allowing us this opportunity to have this discussion today. We're really excited that you all are here too. We'd really like for this to be a discussion. So if you have questions as we go along, we'll try to see that. Let us know, but this can be very casual. Let's do the introductions. If y'all introduce yourselves. I'm a ceramic artist in Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C. I run Red Dirt Studio, which is an artist incubator, ceramic sculpture, and just all kinds of stuff. I also work with Shino and RL at Urban Soils Institute, which is, I'm going to let you say what Urban Soils Institute is, but RL and I particularly working with soil scientists. We particularly work in the end of art extension. So bringing art to the science, helping the science be visible and accessible.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shino. I use she, her, hers as my pronouns. I'm the executive director of the New York City Soil and Water Conservation District, which is a statewide organization, although my conservation district only covers New York City. One of the programs that we run is an environmental education program, and that's really rooted in introducing urban people, any age, to nature that exists in New York City. People often say, you have a soil and water conservation district in New York City, you have soil, you have water. Well, we do have soil and water, so why shouldn't we have a conservation district in New York City? So to that extent, we try to empower people in New York City to understand the importance of soil and water to their lives. And one of the ways we do that is by partnering with artists, because they can actually engage people at the emotional level and convey the importance of these natural resources in ways that scientists cannot do. So despite my name, Shino, which is a glaze for those of you who are potters, my mother named me after that pottery glaze. I'm not a potter. I'm not an artist. I'm trained as a marine environmental scientist, so don't ask me about soils either. I can talk to you about water, but the soil and water go together. You need both to sustain life, so I do that part. Urban Soils Institute is a project of the Soil and Water Conservation District, and we work in partnership with a variety of organizations, both government and nonprofit. And that's one of the things that we do, is events like this to introduce you to the wonderful world of soils.
Thank you, Shino. My name is Connor Czora. I'm a ceramic artist and educator based in Washington, D.C. I'm also the creative director at District Clay Center, which is a community ceramic studio operating out of the District of Columbia. I was born and raised in Webster, New York, and so this project has been really fun for me to engage with soil sort of from the region where I grew up, coming on field trips here to the New York State Museum when I was a kid. And sort of take that history and interpret it through my own ceramics, which you'll see shortly. So very excited to join all of you today. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is RL Martens, and I am a ceramicist and writer based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I work primarily in clay, but I have a deep interest in soils and geology, and I've worked with Margaret and Shino at the Urban Soils Institute. Most recently, one of our projects is to retell or add more information to the history of the soil survey in the U.S. I am trained in ceramics as well as geography, so I bring attention to landscape and historical research into a lot of my artwork. And I'm really excited to be here.
I'm Bianca Dupuy. I own the Broken Mold Studio in Troy. And I mostly teach all day, every day, beginners, and introducing the community to the wonderful art of clay, and hopefully to help people express themselves in that way. This project has been amazing. I finally get to put names and faces together with the folks up here on the panel. And this particular project has definitely made me think about my teaching and the material that I use in so many different ways. Ever since I think it was maybe 2 years ago that we started collecting material, maybe longer. But thank you so much for being here and being interested in the material that we love so much, and that's brought us together.
And the Little Brown Jug show, there's a small collection of pottery here in the museum that you can see. This panel is attendant to that show. If you haven't seen the pots yet, you can go take a look at those after the panel. We'll be talking about that during the panel and showing some about that. There was a corresponding show in Troy that Bianca helped organize. So yeah, we'll be talking about all that. All right. So I'm going to start. I'm going to show some slides, and then we're all going to talk a little bit. Oh yeah, let's talk about collaboration for a minute. Let's talk about the title. Thank you. So, clay from the ground, collaborations from the land. In approaching this work and what we're talking about today, the idea of collaboration with the land really helped kind of focus our discussion. And I really like thinking about collaboration as a project where all people involved bring forth the best of what they can do and their voices are represented.
I don't have a definition of collaboration yet. I'm reworking on the definition of collaboration beyond what we conventionally think of collaboration. So my thinking right now is more authentic collaboration where we are actually bringing those voices that have been suppressed and oppressed to the table. And that doesn't just refer to humans either. So I don't have a definition for you, but my thinking is in that different way of thinking about what collaboration actually might mean to us moving forward.
For myself as an artist, the collaboration is focused on treating this clay as an active participant in the process of making. Right. I think a lot of times for those of us who may be potters in the room, we go to wherever our clay shop is, we purchase a bag of clay, and it's sort of pre-made for us, ready to go. And part of why I was so excited about this project, again, is that opportunity to treat this clay as an active participant in the process. What can I learn from this material and this material history? And I'll trace out some of those elements through my slides.
I love everything that has already been said about collaborating with materials. And I think for me, treating clay or soil as really subjects and not objects in my work, and thinking of them as friends or memory holders has been a great part of being involved in this project. And I also think, collaborating across, not just collaborating with the soils or clays of the land, but collaborating with other human beings is really important to this project and really enriches the conversation. So I'm interested in our talk today to explore more what reciprocity between human beings and between humans and the land can look like.
The collaboration for me between the clay and the land, it's been real interesting. I was very much one that would buy my clay and do my teaching, and this is what we do. And people would ask where I get it from. And I said, well, I don't know. I think it's mined in Kentucky. And I thought I read it somewhere, but I could have totally been lying. And as this project started and feeling the clay that exists that we actually have been told is extinct for a long, long time. I was looking back at pictures when we first started harvesting the material, and we literally looked like we struck gold to find this Scaticoke slip, which thank you, Olga, has found that it's even better than the Albany slip and just has, well, not better, I guess that's up to everybody to decide, or potters that are making their glazes. But it turned into more of a respect thing, and where did this come from? And then I'd be walking along and I step on this stuff every day. I work in Troy. I'm on the Hudson every day. I grew up in Cambridge, New York, which is not far. And driving up Route 40, there was just such a return to my everyday practices and helping me just think a little bit deeper of what I do and what I'm taking from the ground, even if I think that it's coming from Kentucky or not in a mind way. But it's been a growth process, and I'm very excited to keep the collaboration going.
Thank you. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about our individual practices and how that relates to collaboration with the land. And then we're going to follow that up with some hands-on look at materials. And Bianca said she absolutely did not want to be on this panel and get up here and talk. And she only wanted to do the hands-on part. So we've already sucked her into more than she wanted to do, but thanks, Bianca. All right. This is just a picture of RL mentioned the Soils Room at Swale House on Governor's Island. Urban Soils Institute runs a residency program on Governor's Island, and this is our Soils Room, and this is part of what Shino and RL and I are in the process of updating, providing some new layers of information on the history of soil science and the soil survey, which, soil science, like all science, is written from a very particular point of view. And I think Shino's maybe going to talk some more about that. Before I get into showing some of my work, I just wanted to also, this is a real investigation for me. Our show that we did, Little Brown Jug, I have been digging clay from the land for a while, but this was an opportunity for me to, quote unquote, dig deeper into some more content behind that. And I have looked to some other potters for help with those questions. If y'all are interested, the Clay Matters community in Australia, extremely good discussion, thoughtful artists, some great stuff to follow them. They're on Instagram. Yulia Makliuk wrote Potters Save the World, excellent book. She's a Ukrainian potter. There are many Ukrainian potters in this book. You can follow their Instagrams. There are potters who are like in the army, in the Ukrainian army, in trenches, fighting, and also digging clay and firing with their unit, like out in the field. And somehow can message you on Instagram and answer your questions. This is some of Yulia's work. Using broken pottery shards, work that got broken in the war, she's putting it back into her work. Lauren Sandler. This was a program that RL and I attended a week ago. Some similar information, similar content, like let's think more about this clay. Where does it come from? What's the history? What's the story? What story? These are, in fact, Lauren has an excellent list of discussion questions that came with her talk. You can get that from this QR code. You can get that from her Instagram. Some of the questions here. This is one of the questions that really stands out to me. Who has the right to tell the story? Who, if anyone, has the right to ignore the story? So, like several people were saying, Bianca, RL, this clay is a material that comes from the ground. It doesn't come from the store. Even if it comes from the store, it came from the ground, and that ground has a history. And can that history show up in your work? That could be interesting content and could be important to allow that story to come forward. So this is some of my work. This is called These Are Not the Roads You Knew Me By. And that's a quote from Adrienne Rich. This is made from clay from Maryland, from my hometown, or not hometown, but I live there now, Brentwood, Maryland. Clay from, I was commissioned to do a piece for a condominium. And I collected clay and artifacts from the construction site. So bent pieces of metal, roots, clay. This is one way to learn something about the land. This is soil web out of UC Davis. I'm still learning through Urban Soils Institute. Just barely scratched the surface of what I can learn from this website. This is one angle into learning about this very particular place and this very particular clay. This is another angle in nativeland.ca. This is an excellent resource into the Native American history and present of the land. And it would be really cool if those two sites could get actually linked together instead of separated. So just some images about that work. So visually, I took a map of the area and kind of used some of the elements and the clay to put it together. And then it's displayed in the lobby of the condo right by the window, so you could look outside, and once the ground is sealed over, then you sort of have you can still see something about what is underneath. So something about the story. This piece is called Tiber Creek and Other Lost Things. It draws imagery from a map, 1861, I believe, map of DC that shows a creek that no longer exists. Lots of development filled in waterways of DC. Again, it was a development commission. I collected material from the site, buildings that were torn down, clay, and those things got incorporated back into the map that also showed evidence of the creek that no longer exists. So using the clay to tell some story. So this is our Little Brown Jug show. Is it nice to see that again? It was at the art center of the Capital Region in Troy. Look, Connor's test tiles, you can see here on the table. Looking for brick clay, we accidentally found in the same soil profile, there are two clays. One is a brick clay, and the other is Albany slip. The brick clay fired up to glaze temperature doesn't look that great, but the gray clay fired up high makes a beautiful brown glaze. That's what the little brown jug is. And Jennifer Lamack graciously partnered with us, helped curate some pots. Some of those you'll see here in the museum. And lent some of the museum's pots, the historic pots from the museum, to be in our show. So we could do some historic comparison, learn some history, learn some soil science. This is the Albany slip. Actually, it came from Scaticoke, so we call it Scaticoke slip as it comes out of the ground. We can talk more about this if people are interested, but this is how the clay is deposited in varves. So gray layer is the glaze, the gold layer is the brick clay, and in 1 year you would get one of each of those layers. So you can kind of count it like tree rings. So all the room sort of told all of that story. And these are the pots that you can see. Connor. Yep. There's Connor's work. These are the pots that you can see in the case in the museum here. There's mine. The blue dots are the one that were picked. Oh, Ryan doing a glaze chemistry class talking about the chemistry of this clay and glaze. So the clay straight out of the ground, you don't have to add anything to it, is this glaze. RL helped us with grounding questions and resources. Perfect Knowledge of the Ground project, which has been ongoing since 2020. And the reader that comes with that, which is available here for you all to see and to order. You still have copies? And we commissioned for the show a pamphlet, Digging in the Doctrine of Discovery, which RL will talk more about. We had an opportunity for people to donate to land back efforts that's tied to the land that this clay came from. And then this is the last piece that I'll talk about. This is a piece of mine. This is clay from Uncle Sam's brickyard. Uncle Sam was a real person, lived in Troy. You all know this, right? Because you live here. Owned a brickyard. So I made this piece, and I thought it was really going to be about sort of this, literal, like, colonial mindset of extraction, ownership and land. And then I realized that I was sort of following in those same footsteps. And it became a real opportunity for me to do my own exploration. And when I put the piece together, I used soil from my own yard. That's the soil in the cracks. And so the second title, alternate title that goes with it is Your Story, My Story. And these are fragments from the Uncle Sam brickyard site that just sit on top. All right. Oops. Sorry, Connor.
Technical difficulties. Thank you, Margaret. So I'm Connor Czora again. And to briefly just sort of contextualize my work, I'm a working artist in DC, as I mentioned. My practice explores the relationships between historical American and European ceramics and uses that visual language to talk about contemporary social and political issues. So most frequently, I'm working in porcelain and drawing from the more Rococo sort of history of Euro-American ceramics. But for this project, it sort of offered me the opportunity to engage in a different manner through stoneware histories. Because my practice is drawing so much from history, it's a very research-heavy practice. And so a lot of my approach to this Little Brown Jug project involved travel and research into these historical ceramics from New York. So, as I mentioned, I grew up in Webster, New York. You can see right along Lake Ontario it's my grandparents' house, and my house is right nearby. And I live down in Washington, D.C., which is the southernmost point on the map. My journey began going up to here in Albany to check out the New York State Ceramics Museum. Beautiful exterior. But, I began by looking at the Iroquois pottery, or the Haudenosaunee pottery, because, of course, this is the first pottery that was made in this land. Taking a look at the museum at some of the different fragments that remain of these artifacts in this ceramic tradition. But, of course, our focus was on the stoneware collection of the museum. And in particular, I was interested in the ceramics made in Rochester, because, that's where I grew up. So I appreciated seeing these sort of crocks. And the outside, right, we associate the cobalt as that blue decoration you're seeing on the outside of the stoneware. But that inside of the pots, where you have that sort of deep brown, sort of rich chocolatey color, that is the Albany slip in effect, right? Using it as a sealant to glaze the inside of a piece. I appreciated as well seeing this little temperance jug over in the Weitzman collection. And what's interesting to me about this is that it's using imagery of a Native individual to talk about temperance. And so here we have an instance where colonial, assumably white, Euro-American potters are then using some of their imagery of the Iroquois and people who lived here first in talking about their issues. And so the sort of cross-pollination between the sort of European colonial American mindset as compared to the indigenous Iroquois mindset is intriguing to me. I also appreciated taking a look over at the minerals collection. So in the museum, sort of right outside these back doors, we've got a whole bunch of different minerals. And one of those materials is called wollastonite. If you ever make your own glazes or are following glaze recipes, you may know that wollastonite is something called a flux. We use it in ceramics so we can lower the melting temperature of our glaze so that we can have that glaze be effective at, for instance, a cone 6 temperature instead of a cone 10 temperature, which is what I work at. The raw material itself is beautiful, and you'll notice that it is mined from Natural Bridge up in Lewis County. We'll talk about that in a moment. Separately from the museum, I also made use of the Ceramics Materials Atlas. If y'all are interested, this is a wonderful resource that has been compiled showing the history of where different ceramics minerals come from, where they're mined, and it talks about it both in a geologic time sense, what processes produce this material in the first place, but also in a more contemporary sense, what is involved in extracting this product, refining it, and then shipping it to us so that we as potters can use it to make our own ceramics. I found out as I was going through this, that, of course, in conjunction with looking at the museum, that wollastonite is mined right up in the Adirondacks by Vanderbilt. And if you go to their website, you can see, Vansel wollastonite. That's the material that we use in our ceramics practice. That is mined right up here in the Adirondacks. And you'll sort of see I've marked next to it Massawepie Scout camps. I was a Boy Scout growing up, and every summer we used to go up to Lake Tupper for weekly camping trips. And it was sort of just wild to me that this material that is sort of very, very present in our ceramics practice more generally is mined about 20 to 30 minutes drive away from that camping site where I grew up. And so that sort of history of using this material, again, from lands where I had sort of grown up myself, the land that had raised me, was very interesting. From Albany, I took a short trip over to Northampton in Massachusetts to visit a gallery and a friend there. And while I was there, I went to their historic Northampton Museum, which had some more Albany slip decorated stoneware crocks, as you see. What was interesting for me here is as I was looking at the stoneware, I also noticed a sign talking about the Nonotuck tribe, who had been the indigenous group living in Northampton before. And if you look down in that red square near the bottom, it talks about through the process of colonization by European settlers, what happened is many of the Nonotuck people moved from what is now Northampton to the village of Scaticook, north of Albany, and the village where we're drawing our own slip, right? So again, this material that we're using has a history of sort of displacement. It's both raising the people who lived there initially, but it's also seeing the movement of other people as they're displaced from their own homes. From Northampton, I went back down to Ulster County to check out the Ulster County Historical Society. If you haven't been, it's beautiful. It's out in the countryside, historic building. And what I was interested in here is taking a look at some of the redware, stoneware, and Rockinghamware. As you sort of saw in the first images of my artwork, I tend to skew a bit more decorative with things, as opposed to the sort of more simple styles that you see in a lot of colonial pottery. And so I was intrigued by these more highly decorated, highly ornamented surfaces. The downstairs of the museum had a series of, you can see pictures down here. These would have been produced through press molding with stoneware. So they would have created a mold out of either bisqueware, fired ceramic, or out of plaster. And then to replicate this form over many times, different iterations, they would press slabs of stoneware onto the inside, slip and score those guys together, and then pop it out. And you can sort of see that variation in the different forms produced here. We also have a beautiful collection of sort of slip decorated stoneware, but again, leaning more into that brown coloring. What intrigued me the most, though, was the Rockinghamware. And this is a specific style of ceramics that was produced in the United States in the early colonial period through like the mid-1800s. And what's unique about this is if anybody here is into studying American history at all, you may be aware that after the Revolution, England continued to ship a lot of export wares to the United States, in part to try to disrupt local economies here, right? They realized that it was more profitable for them to continue selling their pots instead of sort of boycotting or breaking off that connection. And what that meant for a ceramics perspective is that while we have these sort of more colonial stoneware jugs, a lot of the ceramics you see in early American history is actually imported from England. What's special about Rockinghamware is that this was the only commercial industry in the United States that actually sold more pots domestically than people imported from England. So in other words, this specific style is one that sort of was able to sustain potters in the US. You can see sort of from this jumble up in the left that there's mostly pitcher forms here. Rockinghamware is noted, it's specifically used for pitchers, teapots, and spittoons, for anybody who likes to chew tobacco, as those colonial settlers may. Part of the fun of this, too, is that this was up in some like back storage closet in the Historical Society. When I arrived, I mentioned to the attendant there that I was interested in seeing Rockingham pots. I had read about them in a book, which we have up front if you want to take a look at later. And she said, you know, I think we have some of those, but they may be buried. Let's go take a look. And so I was very graciously allowed to follow her into their back catalog, take a look at these guys. One that caught my eye is this Orcutt and Thompson pitcher. It was manufactured in Poughkeepsie, New York, and this is believed to be the first example of American Rockinghamware that was produced, that they can actually put a date on, because of course many of these pots are not dated. So this one is associated with being 1830 or 1831 or so. And you can see the image is sort of, you know, patriotic early American imagery that we may expect. Eagles flying, lots of stars. The other side of the picture says American manufacture. And I'll talk about that in a moment. In addition to the Orcutt picture, we also have pictures displaying imagery of the hunt or imagery, again, of indigenous people. So again, sort of this settler perception of indigenous people that we're then using to redecorate the pots, tying it back to that history of displacement. After looking through the back catalog, we brought down 2 of the pots and decided that they deserved to be on display in the historical center instead of stashed away in the closet. So if you go over there today, you'll see them hopefully still sitting on that table. From Ulster County, I went back down to Washington, D.C., where we have the National Museum of the American Indian. DC is great for its museums, and they're free, which I appreciate because you can sort of, just on a Sunday, wander over here. And part of what I found was, for instance, the George Washington wampum belt. For those of us who were born and raised in New York, we learned a lot about the Iroquois, right? Wampum being both a matter of currency, but also a matter of documentation, whether that is showcasing contracts that were signed, legal agreements, or diplomatic agreements between the Iroquois and the early United States. This is a replica created by a contemporary artist, but it represents the sort of wampum belt that was created for George Washington, sort of in connection to signings of treaties around the American Revolution and early states. We also see an example of Iroquois displacement. So the 1794 Treaty of Canandaigua, post-American Revolution, you can see that the U.S. sort of granted territory that they had previously taken from the Haudenosaunee tribe. So up at the sort of, well, most of the state, that purple territory is historic Haudenosaunee land. You can see sort of over towards Buffalo, we've got a smaller outline in blue. That is territory that was guaranteed to the Iroquois by this Treaty of Canandaigua. You can also see inside that there's lost states. So that land was fairly quickly reclaimed by the states. And of course, today we have limited reservations around the state, which you can see as these orange triangles. I remember the experience in elementary school. We had the opportunity to go visit an Iroquois longhouse, and it was really special. But I think framing it through this lens, right, the continued displacement of a people from their land, in the construction of broader American society is something that is so bound up with this material. Right, when we're looking at that map, that's, Oneida land, where that will last Oneida's mind. Albany Slip would be Mohawk territory, slightly extended out. And so what I was interested in for this project is sort of connecting this settler colonial history, this displacement of a people, to contemporary events, right? So this process that we see historically of native land dispossession in the United States is something that we've also seen over the past year and a half or so in the occupation and genocide being committed in Palestine. And I think for me, it was incredibly important to tie this historical process of displacement, of removal from the land, to current events where we see the same thing. And this is important because when we're using this land, when we're using this territory, right? For me as an artist, my question is, what is our responsibility? What is it our job to sort of do with the artwork that we're creating? And for me, when we're using land that is historically taken from a people, I think it's important for my work to address ongoing instances of that today. So, as we've seen throughout the past year, reports of over 186,000 people killed in the ongoing genocide in Gaza, I wanted to bring that to the historic form where we're talking about American manufacture from that Orcutt and Thompson era, 1830 to 1831. And I did a series of 2 pictures responding to that, tying the events of the past, the displacement of the past, to the displacement of today that we see overseas. This brown picture was in the earlier Little Brown Jug show, but at the museum, you can see the tortoiseshell variation of the piece. Both of these were wheel thrown in 2 parts and then carved by hand. You'll see the repeated sort of eagle imagery, but other places in the piece that historically would have been decorated with more nationalist imagery, whether that's things like stars or local flowers. Instead, we've got imagery of hellfire missiles, skulls, keys of return, or olive branches that are associated with the native land that is currently being displaced. So yeah, that's sort of a look at my approach to this project, tying the history of this land, of this material, to current instances of the same phenomenon, and using my art to talk about it. Thank you.
Well, tough act to follow. Thank you, Connor, and thank you, Margaret. Good afternoon. Again, I'm Shino. I'm with the New York City Soil and Water Conservation District, and the Conservation District also manages the Urban Soils Institute, which created this partnership with remarkable artists here today. So this is the crew. We were on the ferry from Governor's Island back to Manhattan after a all-day symposium. This is from maybe 2 or 3 years ago. So you can see the team here. Most of the